And now here's part 2 of our episode.
So Ethan, tell us why that's your standout track.
This was this was like the lead single of this album promotion cycle, and I think that was a very obviously like that was a deliberate choice on either the band's behalf or the record label's behalf, because I think in a lot of ways it is one of the most, I don't want to say radio friendly, but like appealing to a larger audience. Because, it does start off with singing. It's very groovy. It's not too long either. It's very evocative. For me, the reason I chose that as like the standout track is I often think about like if I'm going to introduce this kind of a band, a heavy band, to someone who has never listened to heavy music or is otherwise uninitiated, like I think the best way to do that is to maybe appeal to their other musical interests, whether like you, Michael, like you enjoy stuff like Nine Inch Nails, like there's that electronic element going on, and I also think that they're both good singers, and so they introduce them and so you're sort of like greasing the wheels a little bit, you're like priming someone for taking the song in as like as the whole to experience the entire track, and you're sort of like giving them this false sense of security at the start, right?
I think they call that a bait and switch, Ethan.
Sure, whatever you want to call it. But ultimately, more than that, I think that this song is kind of like the perfect distillation of all the things that they do very, very well. That song is very layered. The drum groove is incredible. They're doing the clean singing thing. They're doing the dual vocal clean singing thing. They've got the aggressive vocals. The bass is like holding things steady, and using the keyboards and the guitar, like that tremolo guitar picking throughout, and especially at the end is just like so hypnotic. I think it is like a perfectly crafted song that again displays the things that they are able to do best as musicians individually and as a band collectively.
44,000 points for that.
I can hear the radio friendly aspect of that too, because I mean, and I hope you won't take this the wrong way, because I know when I drop this band's name, I never know how it's going to strike with people. But this does sound. There are elements, moments on this album that sounded to me like, oh, this is like a more hardcore Linkin Park in some ways.
Okay.
Like because I think that like what you're talking about the interplay, but like I mean Linkin Park feels like it's a lot more electronic to the foreground of their
I like
music.
Linkin Park. Yeah, no, it's just I laughed just because I was surprised. I haven't heard that comparison.
The Mars Volta is very present here too.
Sure.
Mars Volta, also Deftones definitely feels
Deftones.
like there's. I mean, maybe not on this particular song, but I think like the second song on the album, I was like, oh my god, this sounds like. I mean, in some ways, listening to this album felt like I was walking down like the memory lane of my modern rock station in like the late 90s, early 2000s. Especially on an album like this where they're experimenting with so many different things, it doesn't feel like derivative, like they're stealing from these other bands. It just sort of feels like they took all the great things about those bands and like played with them. Like, hey, let's try this out in a way that made it still sounds like it's just them. But I was able to pick out like, oh, this sounds a little bit like that, and this sounds a little bit like that. I don't know if you've had that experience when you've introduced the band to other people, but I was kind of able to find some identifiable influences.
I guess I haven't spent too much time thinking about like, oh, like what does this element sound like? Where are they getting influence for this part? Because I guess I'm so invested in the album and each individual song every time I hear it that I'm just focused on how I can't point to another album that sounds quite like this. Like, yeah, like sure, picking out the electronic elements, picking out like the hard rock or the hardcore or punk elements. Like, yeah, those things are present. But when they create this whole picture, I kind of think about this album as just like one long piece of music. You know, I can't go through my record collection or my Spotify and find anything that sounds quite like The Always Open Mouth.
Yeah, I don't think we've never listened to a record that sounds like this on the podcast for sure. And you know what else was interesting about this is in researching it, when you hear about the tours that they were going on, I was like, I don't know any of those other fucking bands that they're going on tour with. So, they were, supporting acts, never heard of them. The bands that were opening for them when they did headline tours, never, I had never heard of any of those bands. And I love that when we kind of identify a subculture that you had no idea existed before. so that there are influences. Obviously, there are influences that we can pick out, but the truth is that they were probably pulling sound and inspiration from all these bands that we had never heard of too, which is really exciting.
For sure. And I know in particular from listening to interviews and reading interviews from the vocalist, David Marion, that he doesn't really listen to heavy music like at all, even though they're touring with heavy bands. But he's like, if I'm just going home, I'm going to listen to like pop music or like, softer songs. That's not a rare occurrence. Like the vocalist in my band, Jeff, listens to a ton of heavy bands, and we go see tons of heavy bands together when we're playing shows, obviously. But for the most part, he's listening to like the lighter stuff, or like his.
What's he listening to? You was on the tip of your tongue. What's he listening to?
One of his all-time favorite bands is Creed, and like
Hell yeah.
Yeah. All of these bands are absolutely pulling influence from bands that we've heard of and bands that we haven't heard of. But I think in large part, they're pulling influence from their community and the bands that they're going on tour with. And like my band, it was not a couple years ago. It was at the end of 2022. We went on tour with a band called Dreamwell, and I knew some of their music when they initially asked us to come on tour. And when we were playing together, I remember the very first night they played this song called Blighttown Type Beat. And the first time I heard their guitar player, Aki, play her guitar riff in that song, I was like, I did not fucking know that you could make that sound with a guitar or any other instrument. And I spent the rest of that tour watching her play it and trying to figure out what exactly she was doing with both hands to make that happen. And, I'm not that good of a guitar player. I'm not going to be able to replicate that sound. It did inspire me to want to like think about the way like I approach songwriting and how we as a band compose our music. Because like, listening to that song over and over and over again and realizing like, oh, it's kind of just like using the same basic building blocks all throughout it for like 2.5 minutes, just offering these really interesting variations. So you don't realize that you're kind of like in the same riff for the whole song. And I'm sure that that's the case for this band too. Like they were going on tour with bands who they became friends with and who were taking musical risks that they wouldn't have considered.
That's pretty sweet, man. I gave you 60,000 points for Creed, by the way.
Well, all the credit has to go to Jeff for that one.
I'll give it to Jeff. This one's for you, Jeff, but it adds to your case.
I do want to voice just a little bit of shade at the Creed thing. Just we're generally a pretty positive podcast, but when it comes to Mr. Stapp,
come on,
when it comes to Mr. Stapp, I have some problems. But again,
okay.
I'm never going to yuck anyone's yum. So anyway,
let's talk about perfection, shall we?
That's why we're here, right?
Yeah, that's why we're here. We asked you to nominate albums that you believed were perfect. So when we gave you that brief, what were the standards that you were using to assess albums against?
I had a really difficult time choosing the 5 that I initially submitted, 4 or 5 or whatever it was, and then narrowing it down to this one was a kind of like a Herculean task, right? Because like, what is a perfect album? Obviously, it comes down to first and foremost whether or not you can listen to it ad nauseum, whether or not you can turn it on at any time. When you find the Shawshank Redemption playing on TNT, are you going to turn it off? Probably not. You're going to watch it wherever it's on. Right?
Yeah.
And whether or not you want to make a case for that being a perfect movie, I certainly would, but that's not why we're here. So whether or not I can revisit it over and over again in different and very disparate eras of my life, and 1, not get sick of it, and 2, find new things to enjoy and relate to. This album came out in 2006, so I was 18 and I'm 35 now. And there, for me and for everyone else, there should be a huge gulf in experience between 18 and 35. Yeah. If you're holding on to a lot of those things that made you when you were 18, when you're still 35, as I have, because I'm still playing music, still playing heavy music, and still kind of working in the same industry and stuff. Like, I would hope that those things that you're engaged in have undergone heavy scrutiny.
Yeah. Well said.
Yeah, thanks. And similarly, I think that the music that you listen to should as well. This record I can listen to all the time, and it's not one that that I listen to every day or every week or even every month. But anytime I put on the Always Open Mouth, I find things that maybe obviously had heard it before, but there's an element that makes me go, holy fuck, how did that happen? What are they doing? And how did I never really notice this part that like makes this song even better? So that was like one of the criteria, and maybe the most important thing. I found myself also wondering about the album's relevancy now, having been released almost 20 years ago. Mm-hmm. You know, Michael, you laid out the thesis of the record at the start, you know, that there's always somebody who's got to be a loudmouth bigot who needs their opinion to be heard. More like this album came out in the Bush era, no? 2006,
mm-hmm.
Right?
Yep.
So I'm sure that this album was written in response to and because of all of that. And now we are living in an even more politically and socially divided era. So I think that the lyrical themes on this record are even more relevant than they were even then. That's a part of it too. You know, can an album like this like really stand the test of time? And lyrically it can, because how much do things really change? You know, people always want the same things generally and are fighting for the same things generally. And, making improvements incrementally. So 20 years really isn't that long of a time. So some of the things that they were rallying against then have improved, and some of them have definitely gotten way worse. I think thematically and lyrically, for the most part, it holds up. You know, I think that another thing that this album has going for it is its preference for songs over riffs, you know? And I think one of the, maybe it's not an issue, because a really sick riff can make a song. I think especially in guitar driven music, there is a tendency to focus on just what the guitar is doing, and everything else might be like just to supplement that. Or even with pop music, like, you know, the focus is on the vocals and everything else is to supplement that. Right. Whereas I think this album, all of the different instruments and all of the layers are serving the song, as opposed to serving a guitar player or the vocalist or the drummer or the keyboard player. So I think that each one of these songs, whether or not it highlights a different instrument, because for sure there are songs on this record that highlight the guitar primarily, and there are songs that are more keyboard focused, but I think there isn't a single instance where one of those instruments overshadows the other. I think that they're all, again, working towards the same shared goal of just creating a really cool and interesting song.
It does feel like there's a lack of hierarchy on this album. There's no like solos. It's not like, oh yeah, that guitar part. It does sort of feel like they are constantly exchanging like energy and like letting some people come to the front at one point and then they move to the back and others. It is a collaborative effort as opposed to a chance for spotlights.
Yeah, it's a very egalitarian composition. You know, even going so far as to discuss like the packaging of the record. I think the album artwork is awesome. I had this album on CD and on vinyl, and both are really incredible, deliberately designed packages. The vinyl record even has, you know, on the inside of the record, just in that blank space off of the label, where there's like sometimes etching. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
There's a phone number that you can call on this vinyl record, and I'm pretty sure that at least at one point it was the direct phone line for one of the members of the band, because I remember the day that I discovered it, I got really excited, and I was like, I'm gonna call this, and I called them, and a person picked up, and it sounded like one of the members of the band, and I got really scared and I hung up, and it's one of my greatest regrets in life.
Oh shit. Oh, especially now living in the era where we can just DM anyone, you know, or at least DM anyone's anyone's PR rep, whoever's running their social media channel.
Yeah.
That's really, you get 20,000 points for essentially prank calling the band.
What would you have said though?
I think that's why I got scared and hung up, because you know, it's like, what does the dog do when he finally catches the car?
Yeah. Also, don't meet your heroes. That's what I've been told. Never want to meet your heroes.
Yeah. I had I had the opportunity to meet these guys briefly at a show. I just went to see them at this venue called the Dungeon in Watertown. This performing arts space that was under like an arcade. And they were just like, it's not like we had like an in-depth conversation, but they were just like really nice and positive people. The drummer who was with them on their last album, but not on this record, his name is Goose, Clayton Holyoke.
Yeah.
He went on to play in Every Time I Die, and now he's in Better Lovers. All of these people seem like they were really wonderful, wonderful folks.
Mm.
Yeah.
Oh, that's great to hear. You hate when you hate when you hear that somebody's an asshole.
Yeah.
You talk about introducing people to heavy music. You've mentioned that a couple times, and I think there's a generosity in that, right? Because it can be intimidating for people who are kind of like a little freaked out by just how loud it can be, or the anger that they perceive. Yeah. That it's not. I don't believe that all heavy music is fundamentally angry, but I do believe that it is a necessary ingredient in a lot of heavy music. Agreed. So I was wondering if you'd say a little bit more about like, in what situations do you find yourself recommending this particular album to people, and kind of like what's the pitch? What's the pitch when you say, hey, go listen to this record? Obviously this whole episode has been a form of that, but like in what situations do you find yourself doing that?
It's been a really long time since I've encountered anybody in my musical social scene who doesn't know this record.
That's good. That's fair.
because I think that there's a lot of bands like my band who are influenced by Fear Before the March of Flames, and probably more so now than when they were popular. So I honestly can't recall the last time I recommended this album. The last conversation I had about it was an argument about which record was better, which was either Art Damage, their second record, or this one. And I was sort of beside myself that someone would prefer Art Damage over this, but I see why. That's
sure.
That's a weird question. It's not a weird question. It's an understandable question. I just don't remember the last time I had to tell someone like, you have to sit down and listen to this.
Fair. I can't wait till you get the next chance. It's gonna be great.
I'm gonna seek it out now.
Yeah. I mean, you do it in a way. You do it all day, every day. Working in radio is you're just recommending music to people all the time. So it's built in.
The next time I'm at a stoplight and I hear someone in their lifted truck blaring Kenny Chesney, I'm going to say, hey, try the Always Open Mouth by Fear Before the March.
You're going to toss the CD into their open window. Say, hey, throw that in there, Buster. Ethan, you're a delight, and we could freaking do this for hours, but we're trying to keep these things reasonably with a reasonable timestamp. So that means that right now we're going to come to the board, and we're going to see how you did, see how the case you built stands up, and make an assessment of whether this album gets included in the pantheon. So I'm going to running back through your points. I gave you 20,000 points for prank calling the band via that phone number that was on the vinyl record. I would have done the very same thing. 60,000 points for Jeff's favorite band being Creed. No shade from me. And Michael, you can keep your shade in your pocket, okay? 44,000 points for talking about how your standout track was the distillation of everything that this band does well, taking Cassandra to the End of the World Party, how that was kind of like the perfect entry point to this album, which I agree with. 3 million points for your definition of punk and the banner that we can put punk art under. I thought that was really well said. 1 million points for CCR being your favorite band. CCR will forever for me be that scene in The Big Lebowski where he just got his car back and he's banging on the roof and smoking a joint, and that's CCR to me, baby. 3,000 points for it being an alien notion to think that anyone might not also be obsessed with music. 6,000 points for Yakety Yak being the inciting incident of your love for music.
Thank you.
And you gave Michael 10 Marches of Flames out of 10 for his 60-second recap of this band and their album. So all in all, I'm thinking it looks like a pretty strong board. But Ethan, around here, the decision always comes down to one man, and he's the arbiter of all things that are good on this podcast and in my life. So, Michael, my dear friend, I put it to you. You've seen the points on the board. You heard the sterling case that Ethan made. Tell me, is The Always Open Mouth by Fear Before the March of Flames a perfect album? Does it go to 11?
Yeah, I'm gonna give it to him. No discussion. I enjoyed listening to this, if only for the reason that it really just didn't sound like anything I'd ever heard before. I mean, it sounded like lots of things I'd heard before, but never all in one place. And so as a result, it felt like something entirely new to me. And that rarely happens to us, I feel like, on this podcast, where we listen to something and we're just like, what is this? And I did have that experience with this one.
I'm glad to hear you say that. So would you liken it to the experience of like seeing a fish with a human face? Like, oh, I can understand these two separate things, but I can't look away from the horror.
Okay, you get an award for the best follow-up question to us, because that is ridiculous.
Damn.
And
what would I feel like if I saw a fish with a human face?
No,
I see a lot of weird stuff on social media nowadays, though, is the thing. So
I don't think it's the same experience at all, because if I saw a fish with a human face, I would be like weirded out and maybe a little bit frightened. And I was not frightened by this album. I was impressed. So
good.
So, and it was to further that point, I think it was harder. We sort of did get into the reductiveness of it. Like this notion of finding what we can compare it to, what we can compare this album and this band's sounds to. But it was harder to be reductive about this band because it sounded so different from everything else I'd ever heard, and also had no context for it in like a historical sense, which our last episode was about Madonna, and Madonna is nothing but historical context, right? So she's more than that. She's Madonna.
She's the definition of postmodernism, but that's I'll save that for my TED Talk. Yeah.
But it was a really gratifying experience in that way. So we have to share what our standout track was from the album, though, because we jointly picked one as well. And I feel and especially in light of you picking Cassandra, I feel like this was a good pick because it kind of rounds it out. Michael, what album or what song did we choose as our standout track from the album?
We chose my parentheses F asterisk 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 KING parentheses Deer Hunter, my fucking Deer Hunter. But technically there's 3 asterisks there, and if it were really my fucking, shouldn't there only be 2?
The UCK though, the UCK doth make a fuck.
No, but the K's already there. It's star 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 and then the K.
Oh.
So I guess the album artwork design wasn't perfect. So I take that back.
I like this idiosyncrasy though. Yeah. That's a good one.
No, it's no. I'm really glad to hear you say that though, because this was my second choice for the standout track.
Was it?
Oh, nice.
Yeah,
great.
Absolutely. Yeah, and when this came out, my younger brother, who wasn't so much into heavy music at the time, like a little bit, but this was the song that I would like put on in my car to like introduce him to this band, and he just like fell in love with it. It's still the song to this day that by this band that he listens to.
No kidding. To me, it was kind of the clincher of what brought my mind back to Story of the Year, and that kind of tone. There was something about the tone and the drive to this song that felt like it connected me to that other time in my life, and that kind of understanding of what heavy music can do. I thought it's lyrically very rich. You move through different songs on an album, and maybe you access different lyrics at different moments. And this was one where I kind of immediately locked into the lyrics, which doesn't happen often for me. So that contributed to it. And I just think it also is a contrast in pace at the back half of the album that sort of turns into the very last few actions, the last few songs of the album in a really gratifying way. So all in all, killer track. Michael, it was one of 2 that you also wanted to choose for your standout. What made you choose it?
Yeah, I mean, I also had Mouth on the list as a possibility, but I mean, for me, kind of the same reasons that you chose your standout track, Ethan. It does feel kind of like everything about this album is included within this song. It's kind of like a distillation of like, very representative of what's going on in the entire album. Well, Ethan, thank you so much for joining us. I really hope that I get to meet you in person, since we are probably just a 15-minute drive away. Like, just had to head down to the Walmart. I could, probably pop by and say hi or something.
That's the meeting place.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, let's meet in the hardware section.
And I want to see a show of yours. That's what I want to do.
Oh yeah,
I want to get up there. I spent some time in the North Country visiting Michael and working on some stuff last fall, and like, damn, I want to see. We need to get to a show of yours. That would be really, really fun.
Yeah, that'd be amazing. You know, like the Potsdam, the North Country punk community for a long time was hurting, and now it's kind of experiencing a resurgence, a renaissance, if you will, and it's like really cool to be a part of it. And you know, I was thinking about this, Tyler, when you talked about how you know, this music can appear very aggressive to people, and what I tell people over and over again is that if you're encountering a good hardcore band or a good punk band, the people in it are probably very nice also. That's not not always the case, obviously. When we did our first couple of shows at the St. Lawrence County Arts Council last year, at the end of 2022 into 23, it was a really diverse audience, right? You know, there were like kids there who were like 15 or 16, people my age who were in their 30s, and then there were some like older people who are like in their like, you know, late 50s and 60s and even in their 70s, who just kind of came by because they knew something was happening. Without fail, the comment that they made at the end was, everyone here is so kind and polite, and you wouldn't think that listening to their music. and that's, I found that to be the case over and over and over again. You know, a lot of people who make the most aggressive music are really like the sweetest souls that you'll meet. Of course, there are exceptions to the rule. There's people who I've played shows with who I'll never play a show with again because they had the bad attitude about it, you know, like this rock star attitude. But I don't encounter that very often. Yeah,
that seems to be the direction that I, even not being plugged into a kind of local community or really like playing in bands like this, I'm even getting that feeling from the wider sort of punk global ethos as well. I think that it's alive and well, and that's really exciting to see.
You should come to a show. It'll be sick.
Count on it. I'll be there.
Well, dear listeners, we'll provide a link so you can access Ethan's band. It's pronounced Sunflower, yes?
That's right, yeah.
Excellent. We will link to that so you can check it out. And yeah, well, thanks again, Ethan. Thank you, dear listeners, for listening to us. And we'll see you next week.
Thank you both so much. This was such a pleasure.